Hi and welcome back to David Pattinson's Accused Friends. Today I want to do a video on what to expect from lockdown 2. Our country went hundreds and hundreds of years with no lockdown in its entire history. But of course, once you violate British civil liberties once, there's no stopping the government at that point. And that is why I called for the citizens' prosecution of the government at the inception of lockdown 1, before it was even called lockdown, let alone lockdown 1. But now we are at the end of September and we're going into lockdown 2. And so I want to do a video on what to expect. I think the first thing to expect from lockdown 2 is to hear government officials using the word just with increasing frequency. It's just going to be 10 p.m. curfew. It's just going to be a couple of weeks. It's just going to be to reduce the cases. It's just going to be to protect the NHS. Whatever it's just going to be, it's not just going to be that. We learned from lockdown 1, it was just going to be 2 weeks, then we get you out of there. And every time we reached whatever it just was, it was always just something else. And this is the way the government entrap its citizens into tyranny. They make false promises. They use flat-out deception. They underplay the severity of the authoritarianism, and they, kind of sleepwalk the populace into, an authoritarian regime, which is exactly what the British government are doing and have been doing since March, all under the guise of protecting you, the people. So it's just a total fraud. It's criminal, in my opinion. It's always been criminal. We had this guy in the news, Sir Graham Brady, who's works in the Conservative Party, runs this 1922 committee, and this guy's always described as the respected Graham Brady. And I'd like to know why this guy's respected and by whom, because I have no respect for this guy. He is involved in being a check and balance on, government lawlessness. And he has just woken up after 6 months to announce the government is operating by decree and not via Parliament, which is a criminal offence, which is the total justification for the citizens' prosecution. But this guy's only realised it after 6 months. If the government were governing by decree, or are now, were they not doing so in April? Were they not doing so in March? Were they not doing so in June, in July, in all these other months? Where was this guy during that time? Maybe he was out there on an ego trip, being so respected by, people I can't imagine respect him anymore. I know I certainly don't. But anyway, his coming out says the government's governing by decree and not through the democratic process in Parliament. But why it takes him 6 months to realise this, I don't know. Nigel Farage, and no one has more respect for Nigel than I do. I did a video back in the summer about the top 5 Britons that needed to step up during the coronavirus, and Nigel was number 2. I'll put a link to that video in the description. And Nigel's coming out saying, lockdown 2 is violating our British civil liberties. Well, what about lockdown 1? Why was that not violating our British civil liberties? What's changed with lockdown 2 to lockdown 1? Well, what's changed is that the politicians who were totally silent about the violation of our civil liberties back in March, April, May onwards, are now waking up to the fact that, this is not just a temporary measure. So they want to try and say, oh yeah, our civil liberties are being totally violated, but yet ignore the fact that they were silent during that time. And I mean, if Nigel's going to step up, I appreciate that. But, where was he back in the summer? He was on boats in the English Channel when he should have been hammering the violation of our civil liberties just like I was. Why is it me that does this? Where is the respected Graham Brady? Where's Nigel Farage? Where's all these other people that are coming out of the woodwork now complaining about civil liberties? Steve Baker is going on about how he supports the respected Graham Brady. Where was Baker months ago when our civil liberties were being trampled on, where people were being held up at roadblocks, where people were being visited in their back gardens by police telling them they need to get back in their homes? These people are such hypocrites. It does get to me a little bit, the fact that we're led by such a bunch of clowns. So the word just, look out for that. Definitely more lies and hypocrisy by our political leaders. You might remember back, I think it was in May, people like Ian Duncan Smith coming out talking about the big V-shaped recovery that was never going to happen. David Davis was saying all the debt that we're accumulating can just be passed on to people in 2050. What if the people in 2050 don't want to pay the debts of 2020? Why don't we pay those debts? That might disincentivize us from taking them all on. All this pushing debt into the future, I think, needs to be highlighted much more. There should be a law against it. We're talking a lot right now about slavery. Black Lives Matter, the BBC, Meghan Markle's pastor. They're saying, oh yeah, there's slavery everywhere. And yet, what about debt slavery? How many members of the government are complicit in debt slavery of our existing population, of future populations, without their vote, without their consent, without their approval? Why don't we start, when we're talking about slavery, why don't we start, talking about debt slavery? How can involuntary servitude be bad, but dumping a bunch of debt on young people, on future generations? Oh, well, don't worry about that, David. That's okay. I think debt slavery is something we really need to talk about. And, I think if slavery is a criminal offence and we have to tear down all these statues, well, why do Boris Johnson and Rishi remain in power, not in a courtroom? So I think that's something we need to look into. So more ignoring of lockdown costs, I think, is going to be a big part of lockdown 2. Before lockdown 1, Prince William was out there talking about mental health. We had this big mental health crisis. And yet, since the lockdown, very little discussion about mental health, as if the lockdown is not going to make people's mental health worse or even keep it the same as it was when we had the mental health crisis. Now, with lockdown 2, I'd imagine Prince William will remain silent on all the mental health problems of the country. Less privacy will be a big factor of lockdown 2, just like it was lockdown 1. I remember the days, and I'm still a relatively young person, where people used to talk about doctor-patient confidentiality, and your health privacy was just between you and your doctor, and there were strict laws on doctors who could not reveal your private medical issues. Now, of course, all of your medical issues are shared with the government. We also had this big thing, I think it was 2017, this GDPR law, people's data privacy. If you gave it to a small business in your town, that was, a sort of a grave data risk, and, the small business could sell it on or exploit it. Now, of course, you have the big tech companies and big government doing this en masse, and, there's no problem with the GDPR law now. Small businesses, pubs can take your personal details through track and trace, and, no one's talking about GDPR anymore. So on one hand, doctor-patient confidentiality or GDPR is like a really big deal. And then on the other hand, we don't need to worry about that anymore because, big government's coming in to eliminate your right to privacy, steal all your personal data, and do with it what it wishes. Again, a total violation of civil liberties. So I think another thing that's coming up, more protests. I know there's a big protest in Trafalgar Square this Saturday with people who are against the lockdown, and I think there's going to be a big need for the anti-lockdown flag at that protest. I will certainly hope to be there. I'm sure we'll see a few of these flags flying in Trafalgar Square. But beyond that, there's going to be more protests. Black Lives Matter. I'm sure they'll be out there. I think the feminists will be out there. Again, with the feminists, we had all this stuff about my body, my choice. Now we have compulsory face masks, and where are the feminists? Where's my body, my choice now? I remember there was some big news story years back. It went on for about a week or so about Victoria Beckham, and no one tells Victoria Beckham what to wear. Well, Boris Johnson's now telling everyone, presumably including Victoria Beckham, they have to wear face masks. Where is all these people now? Where's everyone saying, hey, no one tells me what to wear? What about women? My body, my choice. You can't do anything with women without their consent, except you can force them to wear a face mask. What else are we going to force women to do? Maybe we have to force them to wear certain types of clothing. Maybe we have to force them to, act in certain ways. I'm very aware of the fact that the government cannot compel behaviour. they can certainly prevent behaviour, but they cannot force free citizens to do things. That's what tyranny is. That's what the British government are now all about. But it's amazing how all these feminist groups that are so focused on women's body, women's choice, are now silent about compulsory face masks. And what about men? Why can't men have their body, their choice at the same time? I think so. A lot of hypocrisy with all these advocacy groups, but more protests for sure. US presidential election coming up. I'm sure that'll bring people out on the streets. Black Lives Matter, just a final point on them, of course. They do not spread the virus when they protest, so they have carte blanche to protest as they wish. Lockdown 2 will bring stiffer enforcement by the authorities. Lockdown 1 was kind of a trial run, see what would happen. Now the police more organised about enforcing lockdown rules, bringing in the military. I'm sure there'll be roadblocks, drones, that sort of stuff. There was that police officer in Northamptonshire I did a video about, Ardley, who was threatening to exterminate people. So look out for more threats. Lockdown 2, not nice, but again, when you give up your right to freedom as a citizen, this is how you're going to be treated. I think there'll be talk about lockdown 3 during lockdown 2. If we don't succeed in lockdown 2, we've got to have lockdown 3. And I like to have these with Roman numerals now. I think when I'm an elderly person, if I live that long and I don't die from the coronavirus, my grandchildren will say, wow, you were around for lockdown 1, that's how old you are. I don't know what Roman numerals will be up to by that point, but obviously lockdown 2, so it's like the two eyes together, and then lockdown 3, that'll be the 3 eyes. So that's, I think using the Roman numerals is appropriate when talking about lockdown. Obviously more government propaganda will be part of lockdown 2. I think the government propagandists have been very successful during this year. They've really earned their money, terrifying British people. I was in Belarus last week. I did a video from there, which you can watch. And obviously no lockdown in Belarus, so no lockdown 2. People getting on with their lives quite happily and not afraid. Whereas here in Britain, people are very afraid, and it's thanks to the government propagandists. This sort of started under Tony Blair with the war on terror, which was really a war not from foreign terrorists, but from our own government terrorising us. It continued under David Cameron with Project Fear, and now Boris Johnson with Lockdown 1 and Lockdown 2. I think also as part of the government propaganda, criticism of Sweden for staying open. There'll be articles in the news talking about all these problems Sweden are having with no lockdown, when of course they're not having really any problems at all. I think there's going to be a move towards emigration, especially young people looking to leave the country because there were not really going to be as much jobs, and there's going to be very little freedom here as well. I know in the Caribbean, a lot of these Caribbean islands are recruiting young Americans and wealthy Americans to their islands if they pay an annual fee for a visa. I expect there to be a similar trend in Europe. Some of these poorer Mediterranean type countries will look to entice Britons to go there. And I think there could be some really good deals. I think if you're a young person looking at the next, looking at lockdown 2 and thinking this might not be my cup of tea, you can maybe look further afield to countries with no lockdown, even if it has the same coronavirus and plenty of freedom, plenty of opportunity. I am not encouraging people to emigrate. I'm just saying this is a prediction I'm making. Now, of course, all this lockdown 2 hysteria is being rolled out now because the government have a deadline coming up on September 30th. It's the sort of end of this 6 months from whatever bill they rushed through Parliament without a vote back in March, saying they had kind of carte blanche to violate British Civil Liberties, in the name of a crisis. And this was 6 months only, and it expires on September 30th, I guess March 30th or 29th or whatever was the original date. And of course, they'd already pushed through the lockdown on like the 22nd unlawfully, but that was sort of, you know, ignored in all the panic. You know, government criminality is covered up by the government. And so they kind of kept that hush-hush. But anyway, they've got this other deadline, September 30th. So, of course, in order to get that through Parliament, we have to whip up fear and hysteria and lockdown 2 prior to the vote, so it can just be voted through. Now, of course, there is a possibility that Parliament will stand up to this and say no. Of course, my predictions then would look kind of foolish, but I would imagine that they will. That's kind of what Parliament does. They just do what they're told, like a bunch of lapdogs. They are part of the permanent political class. There is very little competition in our democracy with elected officials. That's why we have people like Theresa May, you know, Gordon Brown, all these dinosaurs still in Parliament. They're years and years and years they've been there. And yeah, you know, everyday people, you know, might actually have some common sense and might actually be in touch with everyday people. Don't get a look in to elections. And of course, we the British people are to blame for this. You know, we allow this to happen. All those people that voted for the Conservative Party at the last election to get Brexit done, the Conservative Party having done everything they could to prevent Brexit under Theresa May. And, you know, they pull the wool over the eyes of the people. They change the leader and pretend the party's changed. And, you know, you just get more of the same problems. And obviously that's what they're talking about doing now. The lockdowns are unpopular. People say, hey, we'll get rid of Boris Johnson to save the party. Why don't we get rid of the party to save the country? Anyone think that might be a good idea? I mean, why don't we just dump these losers? Such an awful group of people, so much devastation to the country in terms of our freedom, in terms of our happiness, in terms of our health and wealth. And debt, so much debt. You know, the future is not good. And I'm sorry that I have to say this. I mean, I've been trying to prevent all this stuff from happening, been calling on citizens' prosecution of the government since before it was even called lockdown. You have to nip government criminality in the bud at its source. Otherwise it morphs, just like it's doing now. So I hope this is a lesson to a lot of people. As we've not succeeded in preventing lockdown 1, as we may or may not succeed in preventing lockdown 2, why don't we come together as a country and prevent lockdown 3? So I hope you like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. Order your anti-lockdown flag at the Citizens Prosecution website today. And we look forward to chatting with you again soon. So thanks very much.